The woman in the green suit. The woman in the green suit stood calmly at the front of the line, while other passengers whispered behind her heels. Straight head, high boarding pass in hand, her face unreadable, her energy unshakable. But what stood out more than the way she carried herself was the silence she met with when she handed over her ticket to the gate agent, a silence that carried judgment and disbelief. As if her presence in that line did not belong. The gate agent, a young woman with clipped blonde hair and too much lip gloss, did not even glance up when Ava Daniels extended her hand with the boarding pass. Instead, she tapped on her screen, then looked at Ava from head to toe, with a kind of slow, deliberate dismissal before speaking. "Think you're in the wrong line, ma'am. Economy is over there," she said with a little tilt of her head, as though she were doing Ava a favor, pointing her away from where she had no right to be. Ava blinked and replied with a voice as steady as the marble floor beneath her, "I'm in the right line. I'm seat 1A, first class." The gate agent frowned again, then let out a little dry laugh like someone hearing a joke they did not find funny. "Let me just check that," she muttered and scanned the ticket. Her expression shifted only slightly when the screen confirmed Ava's seat. She hesitated, looked up and said in a louder voice than necessary, "You must have been upgraded. There's no way this is your actual seat. I'm going to need to get this sorted. Just wait over there, please." A man behind Ava, dressed in a navy blue suit and holding a sleek leather briefcase, leaned forward and said, "She's holding a valid first-class ticket. Let her through already." "This is ridiculous." The gate agent turned to him with that same smirk, as if he too should know his place. "And keep quiet, sir. We have procedures. Let us do our job, please. This won't take long." Ava didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply said again, clearly, "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago with my own account and my own money. I am not moving." By now, people in the terminal had stopped pretending not to notice. Some were watching openly, others had begun filming quietly, their phones tilted just enough to capture the scene without being obvious. Whispers rippled through the air, judgments, curiosity, confusion, and something else, something darker, as if everyone could feel this moment was about more than a boarding pass and a seat. The gate agent's face tightened, her lips pressing into a straight line. "I'm calling security," she snapped. "You're obstructing the boarding process. Go ahead," Ava said softly, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. "I'll wait." Security arrived within minutes. A young man in a pressed blue uniform stepped forward, his expression neutral but unsure. The gate agent pointed dramatically. "That's her. She's refusing to step aside. She's causing a disturbance. Please remove her." Ava looked at the security guard and then slowly took out her phone. Without saying a word, she scrolled and held it out. "Call the number at the top," she said clearly. "Put it on speaker." The guard raised his eyebrows, but did what she asked. After all, the entire terminal was watching. The phone rang once, and then a deep, calm voice answered. "This is Leonard Hughes." "Who is this?" Ava replied. "It's me, Leonard. I'm at the gate, and someone here believes I'm not supposed to be in seat 1A. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Put them on, please." The guard handed the phone to the gate agent, who looked confused but took it. "Hello, this is Monica from gate B22. How can I help you?" The voice on the phone turned cold and precise. "Monica, this is the CEO of Polaris Aviation. We own a controlling stake in the airline you work for, and Ava Daniels is a senior partner. If she is not on that plane in her rightful seat, cancel the flight. If she is disrespected again, cancel every outbound flight from this terminal. Do you understand me?" Monica's mouth opened and closed once, then again. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I understand." The security guard stepped back immediately. Ava took her phone back. "Thank you, Leonard. I'll call you when I land," she said, then hung up and placed the phone in her purse. The silence in the terminal was deep now. Heavy passengers stared, some in awe, some in quiet shame, others just stunned by what had unfolded right in front of them. Ava walked through the gate, slowly, heels echoing on the polished floor, and entered the plane without a word. The agent still refused to meet her eyes. The security guard stepped aside. Passengers moved away instinctively, as if realizing they had underestimated her. Completely inside the aircraft, the flight attendants greeted her with forced smiles, trying to recover their professionalism, but Ava did not pause at seat 1A. Instead, she continued walking down the aisle and turned into the cockpit. Without hesitation, heads turned, passengers craned their necks, some even stood to watch, confused, unsure what was happening. Few minutes later, the pilot stepped out of the cockpit, his face pale and troubled. He walked to the intercom and pressed the button to make an announcement. "Attention passengers, we are experiencing a delay due to an internal matter. Please remain seated for further updates." Whispers spread like fire down the rows. What kind of delay? What happened? Was it security, a mechanical issue, a threat? Something felt off. The energy in the cabin had shifted. People could feel it. Something was unraveling back. Inside the cockpit, Ava was not yelling. She was not demanding. Instead, she had handed over a set of documents that no one expected. Documents that detailed multiple racial profiling incidents involving staff members at that very terminal over the past 6 months, and how she had been quietly collecting evidence, preparing to confront the system from the inside, without causing harm to the company. But after what happened at the gate, after being treated like a trespasser in a space she helped build, she had made a decision. The airline had failed to act now. She would. The documents included confidential recordings, testimonies, and financial audits that exposed certain high-ranking individuals who had allowed these incidents to continue unchecked. And what Ava wanted was simple: a statement of accountability, a public apology, a suspension of involved staff, and immediate training reforms. If not, she would release the evidence to federal regulators, aviation unions, and major news outlets. By the end of the day, the pilot, a middle-aged man with grey around the temples, looked at her like he was seeing not a passenger, but someone far more powerful than anyone on that plane, someone with nothing to prove and everything to protect. He asked quietly, "Do I need to call anyone?" She replied, "No, just wait and watch how fast things move." Now the plane sat still at the gate for 30 more minutes, during which the boarding process was halted. No explanations were given. People were growing anxious, but no one dared raise their voice. Then the loudspeaker crackled again, and this time the announcement came from the head of the airline himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a message from the executive board of the airline. We sincerely apologize for the delay and wish to inform you that all scheduled outbound flights from this terminal are being temporarily paused while we investigate an urgent internal matter involving staff conduct. We thank you for your patience." The entire terminal seemed to freeze. Passengers inside the plane looked at each other in disbelief, some of them realizing for the first time that the woman in the green suit had just done something that went far beyond reclaiming a seat. She had triggered a reckoning. She had grounded an entire airline, not through rage, not through revenge, but through truth, power, and the courage to finally act. Ava sat down in seat 1A, at last, quietly. No drama, no gloating, just a look on her face that said, this wasn't over, it was just beginning. And in that moment, the airline industry didn't just get a warning, it got a message, a very clear one. The plan was already in motion. The seatbelt sign was still lit, but Ava was not thinking about seatbelts or tray tables or complimentary drinks. She sat in seat 1A, the most watched seat on the entire flight, and she could feel it, the silence behind her, the stares, the whispers, the tension that stretched across the cabin like a tightrope. But she did not flinch. She opened her black leather folder with smooth hands and pulled out the second set of documents. She had not shown the pilot because those papers were not for him. They were for the board, for the press, and for the people watching her every move, with hidden cameras tucked behind seatbacks and under armrests, because Ava knew this moment was not private. This moment was public, and she was ready for it. 10 rows behind her, a young woman in business casual leaned forward and whispered to her colleague, "Who is she really?" And the colleague replied in a low voice, "I think she owns part of the airline or something big. Her name is Ava Daniels and I just looked her up, and she's worth hundreds of millions, and she's been building companies since her 20s, and she went quiet for 2 years, and now she's back, and apparently she's not playing nice anymore." Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the co-pilot tapped the screen nervously and said, "Sir, the tower's asking if we're cleared to push back." And the pilot replied, "Not until I hear from above, not until they say go." And then his voice dropped, and he added, "And honestly, I don't want to be the one flying this plane if that woman's not satisfied, because I've never seen anyone shut down an entire terminal like that, not in my 30 years of flying." Back at the gate, Monica, the gate agent who had tried to block Ava, was now sitting alone in a break room, her face pale, staring at her phone, refreshing her email again and again, because she had just been locked out of the airline system and received a message from HR saying she was suspended, pending investigation. And all she could think about was how fast it all happened, and how the woman she had mocked in front of the whole terminal had only made one phone call and destroyed her future in seconds. Ava sat still, but her mind was moving fast, calculating every detail, the timelines, the statements, the leaks, the allies she had in high places, the reporters who had begged her for a scoop. the board members who owed her favors, and the shareholders who trusted her more than they trusted the current leadership. She had remained silent for too long, had given the company time to clean up its internal mess, but they had failed, and now the cleanup would happen under pressure, under light, under the eyes of millions. Flight attendant approached nervously and asked, "Would you like a glass of water or anything else?" And Ava looked at her with eyes that held both warmth and steel, and said, "Thank you, water is fine, but tell the captain I will be sending something through the cockpit door shortly, and it must reach the airline's legal team immediately." The attendant nodded and left, and Ava placed a sealed white envelope on her tray table with a simple handwritten note that said, "Delivered to council, no copies, no delays." In that envelope were legal papers and video evidence from over 20 incidents, all caught on tape, all involving discriminatory behavior, all ignored or buried by management. Ava had paid for investigators, had spoken directly to victims, had gathered a mountain of proof, and kept it hidden until the time was right. And now, the time had come, and justice would no longer wait elsewhere in a boardroom hundreds of miles away. The airline's executives were scrambling, phones ringing, lights flashing, voices rising, someone shouting. Who authorized the suspension? Who told the pilot to hold the plane? Someone else. Answering, she did. Ava Daniels did. And someone else yelling again, "Do you have any idea what she has on us? Do you know what happens if this leaks? Do you know what she's been planning?" In the middle of that chaos sat an older woman with silver hair and glasses balanced low on her nose. She listened to the shouting with a calm expression, and then finally raised her voice and said, "Everyone be quiet," and they listened. Because she was the chair of the board, and she said, "I warned you months ago." She was watching. "I told you we needed to deal with the complaints properly. And now we have a partner threatening to expose everything, and she has every right to do it." Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, a small boy across the aisle looked at Ava with wide eyes and asked his mother, "Mummy, is she a queen?" And his mother replied quietly, "She's something better, baby. She's someone who didn't let people tell her where she could sit or who she could be." Back on the ground, news alerts began to pop up one by one on phones and screens. Major outlets reporting delays at the terminal, whispers of internal conflict, rumors of a corporate scandal involving discrimination, and one name began to trend online. Ava Daniels. People were sharing clips of the confrontation at the gate, praising her power, her grace, her calm under pressure, calling her the hero. They didn't know they needed passengers who had witnessed the moment. Were posting online describing how one woman stood her ground and turned an entire company upside down inside the plane. The captain finally received the official message from the board. It was short and direct. "Let her send the documents. We will review and respond. Await further instructions." He nodded and turned to the co-pilot and said, "Let's get this thing moving before she grounds the whole fleet." Ava handed the envelope to the attendant, who passed it to the captain, and within minutes, the gears of the airline began to turn, not for takeoff but for damage control. Legal counsel was woken from sleep. Statements were drafted, emergency meetings called, and quietly, very quietly, certain executives began clearing their offices, expecting what was coming. But Ava was not finished. She pulled out her laptop connected to the private network and opened a secure folder titled Equity Plan Phase 2. Inside were proposals for new leadership training, updated passenger protocols, hiring changes, and a video addressed to the entire airline staff, in which Ava spoke, not as a victim but as a leader. She recorded the video right there in seat 1A. Her voice calm, her face clear, saying to the employees watching this, "You are not the enemy, but you have been failed, and I will not let that failure continue. I will not let silence protect those who harm others. I will rebuild this company, and it starts now." As the engines hummed and the plane began to taxi, the mood on board was not excitement, but awe. People looked at Ava not like a celebrity, but like a force, something that had walked into a storm and refused to bend. And as the plane lifted off the runway, Ava leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered, not in fear, not in anger, but in strength, "Let them come," because she was ready, and nothing could stop her now. The meeting behind closed doors as the flight crossed over the horizon, and the seatbelt signs dimmed. A very different storm began brewing on the ground in a glass tower overlooking the city skyline. The top brass of the airline had gathered not in their usual meeting room, but in a private security cleared space meant only for emergency sessions. The CEO was sweating under his collar, his tie pulled loose as he stared at the enormous screen on the far wall, showing live footage from the terminal, angry customers demanding refunds, confused staff trying to calm them reporters pacing outside, while cameras blinked red in the background. He turned to the woman, seated calmly at the end of the table. She wore a dark navy suit, no makeup, no jewelry, and yet she commanded the room without speaking. Her name was Evelyn Grant, the chair of the board, and the only person in the building who had not raised her voice. Since the crisis began, she adjusted her glasses slowly, then said, "What you are all feeling right now is not panic. It is consequence, and no amount of shouting will undo what was done. This is what happens when warnings are ignored, when complaints are buried, when leadership chooses comfort over change." One of the younger executives leaned forward, trying to sound confident, trying to fix what was already broken. "Ava Daniels has launched a media attack against us, and she's grounding operations. With no authority, we need to shut this down, legally file for a gag order, or force arbitration. She can't just go rogue." Evelyn turned her head slowly and replied with no hint of emotion, "Ava Daniels has the authority, and she's not launching a media attack, she's revealing the truth. And if you think a legal threat will stop a woman who built 3 companies out of lawsuits and survived 2 federal audits, you're not just naive, you're a liability." Silence fell across the room, except for the quiet tapping of someone's phone as they watched another clip go viral, a video of Ava sitting calmly in seat 1A, while passengers behind her clapped softly. One clip had already reached 500,000 views, another was captioned, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the stakes." Meanwhile in the sky, Ava reviewed responses, pouring into her private inbox messages from employees past and present, some anonymous, some brave, all of them thanking her, sharing their own stories of being mistreated, passed over, silenced, pushed aside, and one message in particular caught her eye. A young black woman who worked baggage handling wrote, "I saw how they treated you, I see how they treat all of us, and today, for the first time, I feel like maybe something will change." Ava stared at that message for a long time, then forwarded it to Evelyn with no subject line because no words were needed back. In the boardroom, Evelyn opened that message and read it quietly, while the others argued around her, and she knew then that the decision had already been made, not by her, not even by Ava, but by the thousands of people who had been watching, waiting, hoping for someone to speak, not just for justice, but for them. On the flight, Ava stood and walked quietly toward the lavatory, passing rows of eyes that followed her every move, some curious, some inspired. One older man stopped her gently and said, "I just wanted to thank you for what you did back there. People like you make the world a little better." Ava smiled softly and nodded, but inside she was thinking about what came next, because this flight was only the beginning, and when she landed, she would not be silent. The airline had no idea that Ava had already spoken to lawyers, shareholders, and activists months ago, quietly preparing for this very moment, not for revenge, but for repair. Not to destroy, but to rebuild from the inside out. And now that the lid was off, the pressure was rising, and nothing could hold it back. That moment inside the airline headquarters, Evelyn finally stood up and addressed the board. "We have exactly 2 options," she said clearly. "1, we continue as we are and watch the company dissolve under lawsuits, protests, and public fury. Or 2, we cooperate fully with Ava Daniels and implement every single change she proposes, including immediate leadership evaluations, racial bias training, executive suspensions, and a new equity oversight committee run independently by external advisors. Choose now, and choose wisely." Some resisted, some hesitated, but no one could deny what was already happening outside their walls. The people were speaking, and the world was watching, and so the vote was cast and the decision made with shaky hands and quiet nods, and for the first time in years, real change began behind those closed doors. Ava returned to her seat. The captain approached her carefully and said, "Miss Daniels, I was told to inform you that the board has agreed to initiate internal reforms, beginning immediately, and they request your formal proposal by morning." Ava thanked him politely, then returned to her laptop and began typing, not a statement, not a threat, but a plan, a detailed list of changes, department by department, policy by policy, a blueprint for justice disguised as corporate strategy. The plane landed just after sunset, and as Ava walked through the terminal, she passed the same gate agent's desk, now empty and silent, and though some passengers tried to take selfies or ask questions, Ava said nothing. She moved through the terminal like someone on a mission, because she was, and her work was far from finished. Outside, reporters shouted her name, asked for comments, pleaded for interviews, but Ava walked past them all and entered a black car waiting at the curb. The driver said quietly, "We're ready whenever you are," and Ava simply said, "Take me to the hotel, then schedule the press conference for 9 Amand." As the car pulled away, the terminal behind her flickered with headlines and flashing cameras and echoes of everything. She had just started, but Ava did not look back, because what she had done today was not for cameras, not for headlines. It was for every person ever told they were not enough, not welcome, not seen. It was for change, and she was just getting started. The press room and the backlash. The next morning the sun barely rose before the hotel lobby was already full of voices. Cameras, microphones, cords stretching across the floor like vines. News anchors rehearsed their lines while producers checked lights and angles. Dozens of reporters from all major outlets had arrived to witness what some were already calling the speech that could change aviation history. But inside the suite, on the 25th floor, Ava Daniels stood quietly in front of the mirror, fixing the single button on her green blazer, the same one she wore the day before, as if she wanted the world to remember not just her words, but the moment they saw her stand her ground. Her assistant knocked softly and entered with a stack of printed statements, interviews, public reactions, legal responses, and a note handwritten from Evelyn Grant herself that said, "You are not alone and we are listening." Ava took the note, folded it slowly, and placed it in her pocket without a word, then turned to the window, watching the city breathe under clouds that had not yet cleared her heart. Steady but not without weight. At 9 sharp, Ava stepped into the press room, and the crowd rose as one, not clapping, not cheering, just standing as if drawn by something stronger than protocol. And before she even spoke, silence fell like a curtain, thick and waiting. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in every face, every camera, every person who had doubted her, disrespected her, ignored her, and every person who had quietly supported her from afar. Without knowing her name, she stepped up to the microphone, began to speak, not reading, not rehearsing, but remembering every moment that led her here. Every insult, every locked door, every fake smile and buried complaint. She spoke about fairness, about policy, about corporate leadership and accountability. But more than anything, she spoke about dignity, about what it means to be seen, to be heard, to be treated like you belong. She said, "We build systems and then hide behind them. We teach customer service but forget human service. We say every passenger matters until one passenger stands out, and then we show our truth." But yesterday was not about power, it was about presence, and I was never alone. I stood on the shoulders of those who came before, and I will lift those who come next. Reporters scrambled to type her words, editors whispered to cameras, viewers at home leaned closer as if her voice reached through the screen and shook something inside them. And by the time Ava finished, the room stayed silent for 1 full minute before a single clap began, then another and another, until the room was filled, not with noise, but with something heavier than applause, respect not given, but earned. But while the world watched in admiration, not everyone was clapping. Behind closed doors in certain offices, certain men were panicking. Ava's truth was dangerous, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. One executive from a rival airline sent an urgent email warning that other employees were already starting to speak up, citing Ava's using her speech as a call to action, and suggesting that if they did not respond swiftly they could face union pressure or even federal review. One board member from her own company, who had voted against reform, called her directly and left a voicemail that said, "I hope you know what you've started, because you're shaking more than one tree, and not everyone wants sunlight." But Ava did not return the call. Instead, she returned to her documents, continued editing the policy drafts, and prepared a memo to be sent to every department outlining the immediate changes and expected outcomes, because she knew this was the part where most people stopped, where headlines faded and work became hard, where vision had to become structure. That night, as she reviewed security footage and testimonies, her assistant rushed in holding a tablet with a breaking news report. "Ava, you need to see this now." She turned and saw the screen, a news anchor reporting live from another city, another terminal, where a gate agent had just been caught denying boarding to a disabled passenger with a valid ticket, and when questioned had said they could do what they wanted because the company only cared when a camera was rolling. Ava felt her jaw tighten. She sat down slowly and said, "Find out who that passenger was, find out if they're safe, and tell the media. I'll be flying there tomorrow, because this cannot happen again, not now, not ever, not under my watch." As the night deepened, Ava stood on the balcony looking out at the skyline, lights blinking like stars beneath clouds. she could not touch, and for a moment she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: the weight of expectation. The pressure of being not just a voice, but a vessel for all the voices that had been ignored, and she closed her eyes, breathing slowly, reminding herself that change was not a sprint. It was a fight, one that needed stamina and heart, and the courage to lose battles in order to win the war inside. The boardroom. The next morning, Evelyn stood at the head of the table reading the latest reports: flight delays down, complaints already dropping, social media sentiment shifting, positive, stock prices recovering, and yet one older executive still dared to say, "She is moving too fast, we need to control the narrative." And Evelyn looked at him with a calm, steady gaze and replied, "The only thing we need to control is how fast we fix what we broke, because Ava is not the threat, she is the cure." Meanwhile, in the other city, Ava arrived quietly, no cameras, no press, just her and her team. She met the passenger who had been mistreated, a young woman named Lila, who used a wheelchair and had been told her seat was unavailable, despite booking months in advance. Ava listened to her story, took her hand and promised her that her voice would not be lost, and that her experience would be used to build stronger protections for every traveler who ever felt powerless. Ava returned to headquarters with Lila's story in hand, added it to the policy draft, and then did something no one expected. She invited frontline workers to read and comment on the reforms before the board approved them, asking the very people often ignored to shape the system that governed them, and the responses came in fast, thoughtful, passionate, full of ideas, and Ava read every single one. By the end of that week, the final draft was ready, a full blueprint for equity, safety, and accountability, ready to be implemented and shared publicly. Ava handed the folder to Evelyn, who took it in both hands like something sacred and said, "You just changed the course of this company." Ava replied, "No, we changed it, and we're not done yet." But deep within the shadows, a few voices were still whispering, afraid of losing control, of being exposed, planning how to slow her down without being seen. And one of them placed a phone call to someone powerful, someone outside the company, someone who did not like Ava Daniels, and who had waited years for a reason to come after her. The voice on the phone said, "She's becoming too loud, too loved, too strong, and if we don't act now, we won't have a chance later." And the person on the other end replied, "I'm listening." What they did not know is that Ava was already expecting it, because power always fights back, and she had already prepared for the storm. The warning that shook her, the sound of knocking, echoed through the quiet office. Just as the city outside began to sleep, Ava looked up from her notes, the lights above her casting long shadows across the documents she had spent the past 2 days finalizing. The door opened, and her assistant stepped in, holding a folder in one hand and a worried expression in the other. "We have a problem," she said carefully. Ava stood, slowly walked over, and took the folder from her hands, reading without blinking. The pages were not about policy or staff or compliance, they were about her, about Ava Daniels, her past, her family, her businesses, and mistakes made years ago. When she was younger, braver, and perhaps to trusting someone, had leaked confidential documents to the press, things that had never been verified, things that had been buried long ago, mistakes that had been handled, but now twisted into something uglier, a narrative that painted her not as a reformer, but as a fraud, claiming she had manipulated investors, inflated numbers, silenced dissent, and built her empire on deception. It was false mostly, but it was powerful, and Ava knew perception could move faster than truth. She handed the folder back to her assistant and said, "Prepare for backlash, because if they are doing this now, it means we hit a nerve, and they know they are losing." She walked over to the window and stared out at the city lights again, the weight on her chest heavier than ever. But she did not feel fear. She felt fury, not because they attacked her, but because they would use lies to try and distract from the truth, from the reforms, from the people she had promised to protect. Later that night her phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Evelyn, who spoke quietly but firmly. "They are calling an emergency vote to review your role as partner. They want to use the media scandal as cause to remove you from the board." Ava closed her eyes for a long moment, then replied, "Let them try." The next morning headlines exploded. Ava Daniels under investigation, sources claim financial misconduct, former partners speak out, stock takes a hit, investors demand answers across every platform. Her name was dragged through speculation, analysis, and debate. Anchors asking, has the Queen of Reform lost her crown? Will her empire fall? While social media split into camps, those who stood with her, and those who saw an opportunity to tear down a powerful black woman rising too fast, too high, too loud. Ava did not release a statement. She did not post. She did not argue. Instead, she went back to work, meeting with her team, reviewing files, updating legal counsel, and then visiting departments in person to listen directly to employees who still showed up, who still believed, who still hoped that change would hold even if their leader was under fire. In one warehouse, a young man with tired eyes looked at her and said, "If they take you down, we will still stand with what you built." Ava placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "They can break stories, but they will not break the story we are writing together." Meanwhile, in the upper floors of the airline tower, the meeting began, board members dressed in silence. Evelyn seated at the head, her hands folded, her eyes scanning faces, knowing exactly who had orchestrated the attack, and waiting for them to speak, and they did, cloaked in concern and professionalism. One man stood and said, "We need to distance ourselves from this firestorm. We cannot risk shareholder trust or public trust, and we must consider removing Ava Daniels from the partner seat to restore confidence." Evelyn did not flinch. She waited, and then said, "Let us hear from her." First Eva entered the room, not shaken, not small. She placed a single document on the table and said, "Before you vote, you should know this is the full audit of every financial transaction I have made for the past 10 years, reviewed by federal investigators, approved by every oversight agency, and cleared with 0 red flags. The rumors are old. The allegations have been investigated and closed, and I refuse to speak until now, because I wanted my work to speak first. But if you want my voice, I will give it to you." She turned slowly to face them all and continued, "You think removing me will stop this movement? You think my seat at this table defines what I can do if I walk out today? My mission continues because I never needed a title to do what is right. But if you vote me out today, you are telling the world that truth can be silenced by noise, that progress can be paused by lies, and you will not just lose me, you will lose every single employee who believed we were finally becoming something better than we were." Her voice never rose, but the silence afterward was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke, until Evelyn finally said, "Let us vote," and one by one, hands were raised, some trembling, some firm, some uncertain, but in the end, the majority voted. No, they would not remove her, they would stand beside her, and the decision was finally. As Ava left the boardroom, a staff member handed her a note, scribbled quickly from someone. Anonymous, it said, "We saw what they tried to do, we saw what you did next, thank you for not leaving." But her trials were not over, not yet, because outside a new storm was forming, louder and more violent, not from the company but from an outside force. The one who had made the phone call in secret, now stepping into the light, an old rival from her early business days, a man named Derek, who had once partnered with her, then betrayed her, then vanished after trying to take control of her first company. He had resurfaced, and now he had joined hands with certain voices in the media to smear her publicly, and he had access to records that could twist facts into fire. Eva sat in her office and stared at the monitor as Derek appeared on a talk show, smiling, calmly speaking lies about her confidence, about her ruthlessness, about how she had cut corners, stolen ideas, even ruined careers. It was calculated, deliberate, polished, and dangerous, and Ava watched it, not with shock but with deep, steady breath. She knew what this was. She knew what she had to do. She turned to her assistant and said, "Schedule my interview live, national primetime, nothing edited, nothing hidden. They want a fight, I will give them truth." She knew the next 24 hours would be the hardest of her life. She would have to confront her past in front of millions. She would have to bleed her truth, not because she owed anyone anything, but because real power demands real risk. And if she wanted to end this, she had to walk through the fire. That night she received a message from Leela, the young disabled woman she had met days ago. It said, "I saw the news, I believe. You keep going no matter what." And Ava smiled for the first time in days, then whispered, "I will, and tomorrow they will hear it, all because the truth was not just a shield, it was a weapon, and she was ready to use it." Her voice was the verdict. Stage was smaller than the rumors made it seem, but the room was full. The lights were bright, the cameras locked in place, the air heavy with the kind of silence that comes before something important. Ava Daniels stood behind the podium, no teleprompter, no cue cards, no protective lawyers, just her and the world waiting to see if she would rise or break, if she would stand tall or fall silent. Millions were watching from phones, from TVs, from airports, from break rooms. They were watching not just for a speech but for the truth. The host introduced her with a brief summary, polished and cautious, then stepped aside, and Ava stepped forward, steady heels, quiet posture, sharp eyes, calm and ready. She looked into the lens, not above it, not past it, but into it, as if she were staring through every screen and into every home, heart and mind that had ever wondered if one voice could shake a system. She began by telling a story, a true one, about the first time she flew alone as a teenager, sitting in the last row, near the bathroom, knees pressed into the seat in front of her, not because she could not afford more, but because her mother believed he had to earn comfort. Ava smiled gently and said, "I worked, I built, I failed, and I rose, and I did it again and again, but through it all, I never forgot what it felt like to be told, you don't belong. And that is why I stayed silent for so long, because I believed the work would speak louder than the hate." She paused, then spoke clearly about Derek, about their past, about the lawsuits that were dismissed, the lies that had followed, the betrayals, the games, the pain, the silence. She broke it all wide open. She named names, cited dates, pulled out proof, not in anger but with clarity, not to destroy but to end the game once and for all. She said, "Truth is not always clean, it is not always beautiful, but it is always necessary, and you do not get to use my past to erase the present." She shifted then to the airline, to the reforms, to the people whose voices mattered more than the headlines, to the employees who kept showing up, to the passengers who deserved more, to the families who never got to speak. She said, "I did not stand to be seen. I stood so others could be safe, and if that means I lose this platform, so be it, because I will not lead from fear, and I will not serve in silence." When she finished, there was no applause at first, just stillness, and then slowly the sound of hands coming together one by one, until the room filled with the sound of something real, not praise, not worship, not noise, but thanks, raw, honest thanks. And across the country, social media erupted. Support poured in, articles changed their tone, critics softened, allies returned, and Derek was exposed by his own contradictions, his story collapsing under Ava's steady voice. By the end of the week, the airline released a full public statement, confirming all reforms, confirming Ava's position, confirming the plan for independent oversight and a new internal council, led by employees across departments, the first of its kind in the industry. Within 1 month other airlines followed, and within 6, Ava had led an entire wave of change across an industry once too proud to bend. But Ava did not stay in the spotlight. She declined interviews, turned down awards, refused praise. Instead, she traveled quietly, visiting small terminals, talking to teams, fixing broken systems, not for credit, but for continuity. She believed real change was not what you build in front of cameras, but what stays standing when the cameras are gone. One day she returned to that same terminal where it had all started. She stood near the gate where Monica once told her to move, and watched a young girl in a wheelchair roll up to the desk. This time the agent knelt, smiled gently and said, "Welcome. Your seat is ready, and we are honored to have you." Ava smiled from a distance, turned and walked away. She had nothing left to prove, only more to protect, because she was not just the woman in the green suit anymore. She was the storm that taught the sky to listen. She was the answer to the question no one wanted to ask. She was the voice that changed everything. The end.